Howdy, howdy, I'm Jeff Spence, and welcome to Webcomics We Like to Talk About. Webcomics We Like to Talk About is a weekly podcast. It's sponsored by Webcomic Underdogs. Check them out. It's a site for webcomic creators. You want a friendly webcomic community? You want advice? It's the place to be. They'll give you advice, hints, tips, ways to improve your webcomic. They'll hold your hand. They'll talk you down off that ledge when things get rough. Webcomic Underdogs is the indie webcomic creator's best friend. All right, let's get to it. Again, I'm Jeff Spence, and today the webcomic we're going to be talking about is Zebra Team 5. Gone but not forgotten, dearly departed, Zebra Team 5. Our guest today is Professor Alton Armbister. He is Professor Emeritus at Harvard University. He is the author of It's Called a Webcomic, A Modern History of a Modern Art Form. Professor Armbister, welcome.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
Professor, you devote quite a lot of space in your book to Zebra Team 5. Explain the reasons for its impact and importance.
Well, I suppose it's really hard to pin it down to one thing, isn't it? It was, at this time, it's the early 2000s. It's 2003, 2004. It was a very one-of-a-kind of thing, even among webcomics. And at this time, there were very few works that would fit that genre, what we would today properly define, as a, quote, webcomic. There was very few of these at all. And then Zebra Team 5 comes along, and it's just very unique, very game-changing kind of thing, kind of webcomic. You could start with, you could start at a lot of places, but let's say for sure, subject matter. The whole thing from the start takes place in this post-apocalyptic setting. And I think that's a very important and very necessary starting place for any serious discussion about Zebra Team 5 and its place in webcomic history, or really pop culture in general. There had been, at that time, apocalyptic webcomics for sure. There had been post-apocalyptic webcomics. One thinks of Johnny Steelfist, The Kids in Potato Sacks, Zombie Tramplers, some of the things coming out of Canada at that time, and the UK, these kinds of things. But Zebra Team 5, this was a comic set in a post-apocalyptic setting. Well, this was, I've tried to think of what a good analogy would be for this, say movies or literature or some field where it's this ahead of the game. One thinks of, for example, Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange, or Saving Private Ryan, where the ramp drops down and there's the ding 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 and the bullets and the explosions in this holy cow kind of moment. That's the kind of impact that this comic had at that time.
Professor, talk about the characters for a minute in Zebra Team 5. You've got some pretty memorable Jeff and Block and Dirk and this collection. What is it? What is about this particular collection of characters that made Zebra Team 5 so special?
Yes, precisely. The characters. The characterization of these would-be heroes, these post-apocalyptic survivors. And again, you have to remember, this was 2003, 2004, and you just didn't have... there was some of this kind of thinking, this idea of taking characters and putting them in an ensemble production, and yet each character maintaining this individuality. One thinks of Torpedo Trainwreck, Bygone Days, Rabbit and Jackfoot, that kind of thing. Some of the stuff coming out of Australia at that time and the UK. But you look at what Zebra Team 5 was doing. You have, for example, the character Bert, who was the first character in a webcomic that was openly gay. He doesn't, quote, come out of the closet unquote. There's no dramatic revelation that he's gay. He's just gay. You have Dirk, the first African American character in a webcomic. You have Block, the Block, who is this big larger than life character, and he's the first character ever in a webcomic to have a wrench protruding from the back of his head. And of course, you have Jeff, this amazing character, Jeff, who is not gay. He's not black. He has nothing protruding from the back of his head. There's no wrench, no tool or other object of any type sticking out of his head. So, in effect, while the others are dealing with these issues of gender and sexuality and race, or having things sticking out of their head, it is Jeff who becomes, over time, not only the most important character in this ensemble, but he becomes the moral compass around which the entire team revolves. And this was an extraordinary thing, really, the remarkable bit of character development. And I think Mcmasters and Cos pulled it off brilliantly.
Professor, regarding the creators of Zebra Team 5, obviously a topic rich in conflict and some confusion. I think for somebody like me, just a fan, from a fan perspective, all I knew was you've got this really great webcomic, and then all of a sudden it's gone. But there was a lot going on behind the scenes, right? So what happened? What was the problem between the creators of Zebra Team 5 that leads to it being canceled, really, when it was just totally at the height of its popularity?
Right. Yes, precisely. And I think it's a critical question, and I think it's a large question that needs to be considered if you want to understand Zebra Team 5 at all. Jerry Mcmasters was and is, to the degree that anyone knows, he's become somewhat of a recluse, but a complicated personality in this equation. Mcmasters had gone through a series of artists trying to realize this revolutionary, startling new webcomic concept, this post-apocalyptic setting, and no artist could quite meet his standards. And then he meets Justin Cos, and there it is. It's this fully realized. Again, there was nothing quite like it. You had Broken World comes to mind. Bach Survivor comes to mind. Some of the stuff coming out of Japan and the UK, certainly. But Zebra Team 5 was. And it did take Justin Cos to kind of make it all work, to take this vision that Mcmasters, who could be obviously extremely difficult to work with, to make this whole thing what it was. Now, as far as the difficulty between the two, you have to remember with each of these individuals, you have serious alcohol and drug abuse. You have some degree of mental illness, more so with Mcmasters than Cos, but definitely with Mcmasters. You have this tremendous dysfunction in their personal and family lives. And this is before either of these men has reached the age of 15. And then they come together in their 20s and form this extraordinary collaboration. And then it just all goes to hell. But not before they create Zebra Team 5, this comet that flashes across the sky and is gone just as fast as it had appeared.
Professor Armbister, last question, just as a way of kind of wrapping things up. At the end of the day, where does Zebra Team 5 rank in the history of webcomics?
Right. I am a bit uncomfortable with the listing, I suppose. As an academic, I hesitate to frame it in those terms, rankings and such. I mean, it's kind of cheeky, isn't it, putting these things in a top 5 or a top 10 or what have you. I think a better way of thinking about Zebra Team 5 is to put it in its context at that time. And again, we have to consider this webcomic being produced in 2003, 2004. At that time, there just wasn't anything. You had textbook armor comes to mind. Terry Modunk, Germ Goon Squad comes to mind. You had some of these kinds of long-form apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic web comics. One thinks of Little Cabin in the Woods, Lysol Firestarter, stuff like that. You had some stuff that was coming, Mexico, for example, and you think of some of the things from Mexico and South American schools of comics, Viva Apocalyptica, Hijos y Perros. You had some of the flourishing West Coast Renaissance web comics, No Water, No Life, Grimaldi's Valleys, but you just didn't have. There was some comics starting to come out of Germany. Der Strunkheistermeister, the Octung Babies comes to mind. Malaysia, they were starting to produce comics around Malaysia and the Pacific Rim. You start to see them dabbling in some of these kinds of apocalyptic themes. But again, you just didn't have any. In the UK, of course, but Zebra Team 5. To get back to your original question,
ranking
greatest webcomics of all time, I would have to think 3.